There were evenings when the sky would melt into a slow, bruised orange, and I would wait by the kitchen window, pretending to do my homework. The light would bleed across the fields behind our house, stretch long over the browned wheat, and the wind would come low and soft, curling like breath through the cracked sill. That was always when he came, the man at the fence. He never knocked. Never called out. He just stood there, gripping the wire as though it tethered him to something more real than his own bones. A silhouette in the fading light, head dipped slightly, broad shoulders hunched beneath a weather-beaten coat. I couldn't see his face. Not clearly. But I knew it was him. My mother never talked about it. She'd shut the curtains at the first hint of dusk and hum songs in the kitchen too loud to hear the stillness pressing in. I was 8 the first time I saw him. I remember it because I'd asked about my father earlier that day. Some cruel, casual question, the kind kids ask before they understand the weight of silence. I'd heard other boys talk about their dads, what they did, how they laughed, how they came home sweaty and smiling and tossed them into the air like the world had no gravity. I had never known that kind of weightlessness. "Where is my dad?" I asked her. "When's he coming back?" She paused at the sink, her back still to me, hands in soapy water. The hum in her throat wavered for just a second. "Your father's gone," she said. "He was a soldier, remember? Sometimes soldiers don't come back." That night, I saw the shadow at the fence. I thought I was dreaming. But he came back the next night. And the next. Always the same time. Always silent. Always staring. At first, I thought he was a ghost. Some remnant of war, like the old photographs and medals my mother kept in a box beneath her bed. But ghosts don't leave footprints. And one morning, I snuck out after sunrise and found them, deep impressions in the soft dirt by the fence. Boots. Real ones. Still damp from the dew. I told my mother. She looked at me like I'd swallowed something sharp. "Don't go near him," she said. "Why not?" She hesitated. Then, "Because he's not your father." But she lied. I knew. There was something in the way she clutched my shoulder too tight, something in her eyes that begged me not to ask again. So I stopped. And instead I watched. The house we lived in was old, wood-worn soft with time. Every floorboard had a voice, every window a story. My room faced the backfields, and I would sit at the edge of my bed, the curtain drawn just enough to see him without being seen. I called him the fence man in my head. It was easier than calling him Dad. He always came alone. No car. No bag. Just that same coat, the same stare. Some nights, he would stay for hours, unmoving, like part of the land. Other nights, he'd only linger a minute before walking back into the trees. Once I thought I saw him cry. He put his hand to his face and turned away, his shoulders shaking. But even then, he said nothing. Sometimes I'd whisper to the glass, "Why don't you come in?" He never answered. Years passed. Seasons changed. He came less often. By the time I was 12, I wasn't even sure I believed he was real anymore. My mother never mentioned him. And when I brought it up, rarely, she'd find a way to redirect. A new project. A chore. A story about school or the weather. Anything but the man at the fence. But I never forgot. And I never stopped looking. The last time I saw him, I was 15. I remember because I'd just gotten my learner's permit, and I'd driven us home from the grocery store while my mother clenched the armrest like it was a life preserver. That night, the sky was a dull gray, the kind of color that steals sound. I was sitting in my room when I felt it, the hush, the pull. I looked out. There he was. He looked older. Thinner. His coat was ripped at the sleeve. He didn't touch the fence this time. Just stood a few feet away from it, like even the wire had grown too heavy to bear. I leaned closer, and for a moment, I thought he looked right at me. I stood. I went downstairs. My mother was in the kitchen, her hands wrapped around a mug of tea she wasn't drinking. "I'm going out there," I said. "No. I need to." Her eyes met mine. Tired. frightened. But she didn't stop me. I stepped out into the dusk. The wind was colder than it should have been for spring. I walked slow, each footfall crunching in the brittle grass. As I got closer, I could see more of him, gray in his beard, lines around his eyes, scars half hidden by his collar. He watched me, unmoving. "Are you him?" I asked. He didn't answer. I took another step. "Why do you come here? Why don't you come in?" Still silence. And then, just as I reached the edge of the fence, he stepped back. "Wait," I said. He turned. "Please." He stopped. For a second, I thought he'd come closer. But then he shook his head. Not a no. Not exactly. More like a flinch. Like he couldn't. And then he walked away. I watched him until he disappeared into the trees. That was the last time I saw the man at the fence. For years after, I told myself it didn't matter. That maybe my mother was right. That maybe he wasn't my father. Maybe he was some drifter, broken by war, confused, haunted. But I never really believed that. Not in the pit of me. Not where the truth lives, no matter how deep you bury it. It wasn't until I was 28, after my mother's funeral, after I'd packed her life into boxes and dusted the corners of memory, that I found the letter. It was tucked in the bottom of her jewelry box, beneath a velvet pouch of broken necklaces. Yellowed with age. Addressed to her in a careful, shaking hand. I opened it with fingers that trembled. And when I read it, everything I thought I knew began to unravel. The letter was dated June 3, 2005, 5 months after my 8th birthday. 5 months after the first time I saw the man at the fence. It began without greeting. "I don't expect you to forgive me. I don't even expect you to read this. But I need you to know, before the silence becomes permanent, that I tried. God help me, I tried." His handwriting was tight and slanted, each word carefully carved like he was afraid of making too much noise. I read it once, then again, the words growing heavier each time. It wasn't a confession so much as a collapse, paragraph after paragraph of a man unraveling on paper. I came home, but I wasn't me. Not the me you knew. Not the man who left. Something stayed out there. Or maybe something followed me back. I stood outside the house for hours that first night. I saw you through the window. You were holding him. Our son. He looked at you like you were the only safe place in the world. And I thought, if I stepped inside, I would poison that. I've seen what broken men do. I've seen how they leak into the people they love. I couldn't let that happen. I thought leaving again would be the kindest thing. I thought I could haunt from a distance. Watch, not touch. Be close without doing damage. But every time I leave, I feel like I'm bleeding. And every time I come back, I remember why I left. He signed it with a name I hadn't heard since I was a child. Jonah. My father's name. I sat there for hours, the letter in my lap, the house silent around me. The walls groaned in that old way they always had, like they too remembered. I could almost hear the wind at the fence. Could almost see the silhouette through the dusk. He had come back. He had been there. All those nights. Watching. Fearing. Loving from the wrong side of the wire. After the funeral, I stayed in the house longer than I meant to. Something about it wouldn't let me go. Not yet. I spent days sifting through her things, not just packing but listening. Every photograph whispered. Every drawer creaked with memory. In the attic, I found an old footlocker. Military issue. It had my father's name etched faintly into the side, barely legible beneath years of dust. Inside, letters, photographs, dog tags. A Purple Heart. A worn paperback copy of Slaughterhouse-Five with passages underlined in red. And tucked in a small envelope, another letter, addressed this time to me. For when he's ready. I didn't open it right away. I held it like it might vanish if I blinked. My hands weren't ready. My heart wasn't ready. But the boy in me, the one who had whispered to the glass and watched shadows in the field, he needed it. I broke the seal. Son, I don't know if this will ever reach you. I don't know if you'll care. Maybe by now you've written me out of your story, and maybe that's what I deserve. I didn't just leave once. I left again and again. I told myself I was sparing you. I told myself I was protecting you. But the truth is, I was scared. Not of you. Never of you. Of myself. The war took things from me. Things I didn't know how to get back. Some nights, I'd wake up screaming. Others, I couldn't sleep at all. I'd look at my hands and feel like they weren't mine. Like they belonged to another man. A man who did terrible things. I was afraid that man would raise you. That he would pass on the rot in his chest. So I stayed away. I stood at that fence more times than I can count. I watched you grow. I saw your first steps. Heard your laughter float through the windows. I was there, even when I shouldn't have been. I don't know if that counts for anything. But it's the only truth I have left. I love you. I have always loved you. Dad. I didn't cry right away. I sat still, numb, the letter folded in my lap like a sleeping thing. The attic was hot, dusty. Light filtered in through a slatted vent, catching in the dust motes that swirled like ash. Then something broke in me. Quiet. Cracking. And the sobs came not from my throat but from somewhere deeper, like they'd been waiting decades for a door to open. He had loved me. In the only way he knew how. That night, I returned to the fence. The fields were overgrown now, and the path he used to walk was barely a memory in the grass. But I found it. I followed it to the spot where he'd always stood. The wire was rusted. The post sagging. I reached out and gripped the top line of wire, the way he used to. It bit into my palm, but I didn't let go. I closed my eyes and tried to imagine him there, just across from me. Silent. Watching. I got your letter, I whispered. The wind picked up. It wasn't an answer. But it was something. I'm sorry it took so long. I stood there until the stars came out. And then longer still. And for the first time in years, I didn't feel alone. I began to search. Not for ghosts. For records. VA offices. Online databases. Veteran forums. I pieced together fragments, old addresses, discharge papers, fragments of a man I had only known in silhouette. It took 6 months before I found someone who remembered him. A nurse at a shelter in Montana. Said he came and went. Never stayed more than a few days. Always quiet. Always looking toward the edge of things. She gave me the last known address he'd used, a P.O. box in a town I'd never heard of. It was a lead. Maybe the last one I'd ever get. I bought a bus ticket. Because for the first time, I wasn't afraid of the fence. I was ready to cross it. The bus rolled into the station just after noon. Shadow Pines wasn't much of a town, barely more than a cluster of streets cradled between two ridgelines, with a diner, a gas station, and a post office that looked like it hadn't been repainted since the 70s. The air smelled like pine and dry dust. Everything here seemed a little faded, like the sunlight passed through a memory before it touched the ground. I got off with a single bag slung over my shoulder, and the name Jonah Reed printed on a slip of paper, followed by the address of the post office. Inside, the clerk, a woman in her 50s with a smoker's voice and a fading tattoo on her wrist, narrowed her eyes when I asked about the box. You family? She asked. I think so, I said. She studied me, then disappeared into the back. She came out with a battered envelope. It had no return address, but my name was on it. Not the full name. Just Cal. It had been mailed 2 weeks ago. I figured if you came this far, you'd find me. I'm not hiding. Not really. There's a bench on the North Ridge, overlooks the old logging road. I go there most evenings. Bring a jacket. The wind cuts like it remembers something. Jay. The clerk watched me read it. You all right? I think so. You look like someone who hasn't had a proper talk with his past yet. I'm working on it. She nodded like she'd seen that before. I spent the afternoon walking the town. There wasn't much to it. Some boarded windows, a faded mural of an eagle, a church bell that hadn't rung in years. But there was peace in it. The kind of silence that made space for grief. At dusk, I followed the trail out past the cemetery and up toward the north ridge. The path curved through tall grass and broken fence posts until it opened onto a clearing. There was a bench. Old. Splintered. And there he was. He was thinner than I remembered. The beard longer. Grayer. He was wearing the same coat, patched now, held together by thread and habit. He didn't turn when I approached. Just said, "Took you long enough." I sat beside him. The wind was sharp, just like he said. "I found your letters," I said. He nodded. "I figured. Your mother kept them. I asked her not to. But she never listened to me much." "You knew she passed?" "I felt it." His voice cracked. "I felt it in my bones." Silence again. But this time, it wasn't empty. "I hated you," I said. He nodded. "You should have. I watched you for years. I waited. I thought maybe one day you'd speak. Come inside. Be something. I wanted to. Every night. I practiced it in my head 1,000 times. But the door, it felt like a wall. And I wasn't sure what kind of man would walk through." I looked at him. At the lines carved deep around his eyes. At the fingers trembling against his knees. "You were my father." "I still am." "No," I said. "You were the man at the fence. That's who you chose to be." He looked like he wanted to break. To fold inward and vanish. But I didn't let him. "I read your words. I know you thought you were protecting me. But you weren't. You were protecting yourself. You let the fear win." He nodded. "I know. I'm not a boy anymore. And I didn't come here for an apology. I came here for the truth." He finally turned to face me. "I've been waiting to give it to you." We talked until the sky turned black and the stars came out raw and bright. He told me about the war. About the village he couldn't forget. About the things he did and didn't do. About the noise that never left his head, the images that burned behind his eyelids when he tried to sleep. "I didn't know how to be anything but haunted," he said. "And I didn't want that ghost to raise you." I told him about growing up. About the birthdays and the baseball games and the science fairs he missed. About how I stood by my window some nights, hoping the shadow would wave. "I saw you," he whispered. "Every time. And it broke me." We sat in the stillness of what could have been, and for the first time, he didn't run. He stayed. The wind howled over the ridge. Below us, the lights of shadow pines flickered. He leaned back on the bench and closed his eyes. "I never thought I'd get to sit like this with you," he said. "I never thought I deserved to." "Maybe you don't," I said. "But I'm here." And that, for now, was enough. The morning after the ridge, I woke in a room above the diner. Small, clean, quiet. The walls were thin enough to let in the early voices of the kitchen staff downstairs. The smell of bacon and coffee pushed through the floorboards like a memory I didn't own. I sat on the edge of the bed, staring at my shoes for a long time before lacing them. Outside the window, the street yawned into day, and the wind was already stirring the pine needles. I didn't expect him to be there again. I figured maybe that moment had been a one-time thing, something rare and fragile, like fog on glass that disappears the moment you breathe. But just before noon, I found him on the back patio of the diner, sitting with a coffee, facing the street. He saw me and raised a second cup. "I figured you'd be hungry," he said. We didn't talk much at first. Just sat in the rising warmth of the sun and let the silence stretch. It didn't feel strained. Just worn in. Like a coat you hadn't put on in years but still remembered how to wear. Eventually, he said, "I wasn't much older than you are now when I left." "You mean when you left the war?" He shook his head. "No. When I left you." I didn't reply. He sipped his coffee and looked past the trees. "I thought I'd come back stronger. Wiser. But the war doesn't teach you how to live. Just how to survive. And I didn't know what to do with peace." It scared me more than the desert ever did. I nodded slowly. Peace is louder than we think. Has more echoes. He looked at me, almost smiled. Yeah. That's exactly it. We walked the town together that afternoon. People nodded at him. A few said hello. One man across the street raised a hand and called, "Still alive, Jonah?" He just waved back and muttered, "Barely. People know you here," I said. "I drift in and out. Shadow Pines is good for people like me. We pass through and leave most of our noise behind." We passed the community center with faded murals and an old library with crooked shelves. At one point, he pointed to a broken swing set in the park. "Built that with a few of the guys," he said. "Wasn't much, but for a while, we pretended we were fixing something." That evening, we sat again at the ridge. He brought a flask. Poured a small amount into the air. "For the ones who didn't come back." Then another, smaller pour. "For the ones who did, and couldn't stay." He handed it to me. I didn't drink. Just held it. "Do you still talk to Mom?" I asked. He looked down. "In my head. Sometimes I think I hear her answer. She didn't hate you." "I know. That's what makes it worse. She loved me enough to let me go. She always hoped I'd find my way back. You didn't, though." He nodded. "I got lost in a place that had no map." The next morning, I found him in the church. It was quiet. Empty. The pews coated in dust. He sat near the back, staring at the stained glass window where a sunbeam broke into fractured colors. "Never much for God," he said as I sat beside him. "Then why come here?" He shrugged. "Places like this, they remember things, even when people don't. I think memory is holy. Even when it hurts." I looked around. The silence was thick, but not unfriendly. More like something watching with patience. He took something from his coat pocket and handed it to me. A photograph. It was of me. 8 years old. Standing on the porch in a Halloween costume. I don't remember who took it, maybe Mom, but the angle was from far off, like across the yard. "You kept this?" He nodded. "I have a stack of them. In a tin box. Every birthday. Every holiday. Every time I came back to watch." Tears blurred the edges of the photo. "I wanted to be your father, Cal. I just didn't know how to be a man yet." "You were scared." "Yes. And I thought fear made me unworthy." "It didn't," I said. He closed his eyes. Let out a long breath. "You have no idea what it means to hear that." "I think I do." He reached over, put his hand over mine. "I'm not asking to be in your life," he said. "I just needed to know I hadn't destroyed it." "You didn't," I whispered. But it took a long time to understand why. When we walked back down the trail, the sun was dipping low again. We paused at the edge of the woods, where the trees began to crowd the path. He turned to me. "Tomorrow," he said. "You don't have to stay. You've done more than I had any right to ask. I'm not leaving yet." "You sure?" I nodded. "There's still more I want to know. Still more I want to say." He looked at me like he was afraid to believe it. And then, for the first time since I was a child, I saw him smile. He didn't come to the ridge the next morning. I sat there anyway. Alone this time. The bench felt colder without him beside me, and the wind carried more bite than before. I stared at the empty logging road stretching below, where trees hunched over like quiet witnesses. I half expected to see his coat moving through the branches. He was teaching me something in his absence, though I didn't know what yet. Back at the diner, the same waitress gave me a sympathetic nod. She handed me a note with my check. Went out to the lake. "If you're up for the hike, follow the riverbed past the second switchback. Bring water. J." The trail was steep and narrow, cut 3 years ago by hunters and rain. I followed the riverbed until the sound of rushing water faded into birdsong. The lake revealed itself slowly, like it didn't trust me yet. Trees gave way to a clearing, and there he was, sitting on the rocks, his boots dangling just above the water. "You're late," he said. "I got lost." He smiled. "You always did walk like you were carrying too much." I joined him. The lake was clear, glass still, reflecting the sky like it was trying to remember what it looked like before the world turned hard. "This is where I come when I don't want to disappear entirely," he said. "Does that happen often?" He nodded. "More than it should." We sat in quiet for a long time. Eventually, he reached into his bag and pulled out a small wooden box. No lock. Just age and wear. He opened it between us. Inside, more photos. Old ones? Some faded beyond recognition. A few had notes on the back. Me, 5 years old, reaching for a balloon. Mom, asleep on the couch with a book open across her chest. A Christmas tree in a different living room. One I didn't recognize. "These are the pieces I kept," he said. "Every time I came back, I left with one. A shard of a life I couldn't hold on to." I sifted through them slowly. There was a pain to it, but also a warmth. Like pressing your fingers to a scar and remembering how you survived. "This one," I said, holding up a photo of me at the zoo, riding on his shoulders. "I don't remember it." "You were 3. You cried when the gorilla banged the glass. I bought you a stuffed one on the way out. You named it Tank." I smiled. "I think I still have it. I wanted you to have good memories. Even if you didn't know where they came from." That night, we built a fire by the lake. The smoke curled up into the branches like a prayer. We ate canned beans and stale bread, and he pulled out a harmonica from his coat pocket. Played a low, broken tune that seemed to know my name. "What happens after this?" I asked. He stared into the fire. "You mean after the lake? Or after us?" "Both. I don't know. Maybe I go back to my drifting. Maybe you go back to your life. Or maybe we write new maps. I don't want to forget this." "You won't. The bones remember, even when the flesh lies." I looked at him, this man who had haunted my boyhood like a myth, and saw not a ghost, but a father. Flawed. Scarred. Still standing. "I think I'm ready to let go of the fence," I said. He nodded. "I think I'm ready to step through it." The fire crackled. Somewhere in the dark, an owl called. And we stayed, 2 men sharing silence, not as strangers, but as something almost whole. In the days that followed, we settled into a rhythm. Mornings were quiet, coffee, walks, the occasional wordless hour where just breathing the same air felt like enough. Afternoons we talked. Not always about the past. Sometimes we argued about music or laughed over memories that had long since turned soft at the edges. There was a gentleness to the time. A lull. Like the space between storms. One afternoon I asked him, "Why here? Why Shadow Pines?" He took a long breath, letting it out like something he'd been holding since his 20s. "Because no one follows ghosts here. People mind their own grief. And the land doesn't ask questions. Did you ever want to stop running?" "I did stop," he said. "The moment you found me." We visited the VA clinic one morning. He needed a refill on a prescription, and I went with him. The building was clean but tired, like everyone inside it. Nurses who didn't smile much. Walls painted in neutral tones to soothe nerves that had been shattered overseas. I sat beside him in the waiting room, watching a clock that seemed to forget how to move. "Did you ever get help for the nightmares?" I asked. He shrugged. "Tried. The first time, I told them everything. The doctor just blinked. Didn't know what to say. So I stopped trying. Figured silence was safer. Silence is what kept you from me." "I know." He looked down at his hands. They trembled slightly. "But you're here now," I said. He looked at me then, and his eyes were red-rimmed but steady. "Only because you came looking." That evening, back at the ridge, I brought a notebook. "I've been writing," I told him. "About all of this." He raised a brow. "Like a memoir?" "Something like that. It's for me. But maybe one day, for someone else too." He nodded. Words are how we forgive the parts of ourselves we can't explain. I think I'm still figuring out how to forgive you. That's all right, he said. I'm still learning how to forgive me too. He took the notebook gently from my hands and flipped through the pages. You were always a good observer, he said. Even when you were a kid. Always watching from behind windows. I was waiting. I know. He handed the notebook back. Keep writing. Don't let my silence become your inheritance. Later that night, we sat around a new fire. He had pulled out his harmonica again. This time, he handed it to me. I don't know how to play, I said. Doesn't matter. Just breathe through it. I did. A rough, wailing note. Then another. Soon I found a rhythm, crude and fragile, but mine. He smiled. Sounds like grief trying to remember how to sing. I think it is. We played together, his chords gentle, guiding. Mine uncertain, reaching. It wasn't music, not really. But it was a conversation. And we were finally speaking the same language. A week passed. Then another. He started showing me parts of his life, not just the shadows he'd been living in, but the small rituals he'd created to survive them. The way he carved pieces of driftwood into shapes. The old cassette tapes he played on a dusty player he'd repaired himself. His journals, dozens of them, filled with fragments of thoughts, half-formed prayers, and sketches of places I recognized only from dreams. This is what kept me tethered, he said one night, showing me a small, palm-sized carving of a bird mid-flight. Every time I felt like drifting too far, I'd make something. Like proof I still existed. You were always more than a shadow, I said. He didn't answer, but the look on his face softened into something close to peace. One morning, I found him in the woods behind the ridge, digging. Need a hand? I asked. He looked up, wiping his forehead. Only if you're willing to get dirty. Together we unearthed what turned out to be an old ammunition box, rusted shut. He pried it open with a pocket knife. Inside, letters. Dozens. All addressed to me. Some dated from my childhood. Some never finished. I wrote one every birthday, he said. Every milestone. I couldn't send them, but I couldn't throw them away either. I picked one at random. The handwriting was younger, steadier. Cal, you turned 10 today. Double digits. I wonder if you still laugh the same way. I wonder if you still ask too many questions at dinner. I wish I could have been there to answer them. But all I have are these words. And the hope that someday they'll find you. My throat closed. He rested a hand on my shoulder. I buried the box because I couldn't bear to carry it anymore. But I didn't want to lose it either. Then let's take it back, I said. It's time it saw the light. We spent the afternoon reading. Not all of them. Just enough to feel the weight of time between us. His words were clumsy at first, guarded. But with each page I could feel him reaching across the years. Trying. He had always been trying. That night, I asked him if he had any photos of his own father. He shook his head. Nothing. He was gone before I could remember his face. Maybe that's why I was so afraid to leave a mark. Like I was destined to vanish too. You didn't vanish, I said. You left a scar. And scars are proof something healed. We sat in silence for a while, until he whispered, You're not just my son. You're my witness. I know, I said. And I won't forget. The next morning, he gave me a set of keys. To the cabin, he said. If you ever need to disappear. Or if you ever need to find me again. I took them. Heavy, cold in my palm. But not unfamiliar. We walked the path to the fence one last time. He stopped where he used to stand. The spot where, for years, he had watched in silence. I hated this place, he said. It made me feel like I was made of glass. And now? He looked at me. Now it feels like where I came back to life. I didn't say anything. I just stood with him, shoulder to shoulder, where the boy I once was had begged a ghost to speak. And the man beside me had finally answered. We spent our final morning together fixing the porch. The old boards groaned with every step, threatening to collapse beneath the smallest shift in weight. He pulled out a hammer and a box of bent nails he'd been saving for years. "You don't throw away good iron," he said, tapping one into place. "You straighten it. You give it another chance. Like people?" He looked up at me, eyes narrowed against the sun. "Exactly like people." We worked in silence, sweat on our brows, the smell of cedar thick in the warm air. Each strike of the hammer was a kind of rhythm, a slow cadence to match the things we didn't say. The porch, like us, was being rebuilt with old tools and fractured faith. When it was done, we sat on the steps and watched the wind ripple across the tall grass. It felt like we had built something more than just wood and nails. It felt like proof. Later, inside the cabin, he pulled out a map. "This is where I go next," he said. "There's a center up north. Not quite a hospital, not quite a home. They help guys like me find something steady." I nodded, unsure how to feel. "I don't want to disappear again," he added. "Not without a direction. And not without knowing you'll be okay." "I will be," I said. "I'm not that kid at the window anymore." He looked at me with pride, but also sorrow. "I wish I'd been around to see you become this man." "You were," I said. "In your own way. Too far away. Maybe. But still there." That evening, we stood at the fence one last time. This time, he didn't stay on the other side. We crossed it together. He handed me the photograph of my mother, the one he kept in his wallet, folded so many times it was barely holding together. "I never stopped loving her," he said. "I know." He took off his coat, the same one he wore all those years, and draped it over my shoulders. It smelled like pine and rain and smoke. "Keep it," he said, "for when the wind comes." And then he pulled me in, arms wrapped around me in a way I had never felt before. Not from him. Not in memory. "I'm proud of you, Cal. You found me. You held on." I held him back. Tight. Fierce. "You didn't break me," I said. "You gave me something to search for." He nodded. Tears traced down his cheeks. Neither of us wiped them away. And when he left, he didn't vanish into the trees. He walked the open road. No longer a ghost. No longer a man at the fence. Just my father. Still flawed. Still healing. But walking towards something new. He called once a week. At first, it was short calls, weather, food, a shared silence that still knew how to hold meaning. But over time, his voice grew steadier, his stories longer. He talked about the center up north, how he'd started helping new arrivals, showing them how to whittle small animals from pine. Said it helped them remember they could shape things instead of destroy them. "It's slow," he told me. "But slow feels right." I told him about home, about repairing the fence behind the house, replacing each post, not to keep people out, but to hold something steady. I kept his coat in the hall closet. Some nights, when the wind turned cold and carried the hush of memory, I'd wear it out on the porch. Just to remember. And on the third call, he said, "I think I might visit. If that's all right." I didn't hesitate. "I'll be here." He came in late October. The trees had turned, fire spilling through their limbs, and the mornings were brisk enough to see your breath. He looked healthier. Not whole, but on the road. "I never liked autumn," he said, standing beside me on the porch. "Too many endings." "It's not the end," I said. "Just the part where things learn how to let go." He nodded. "Maybe I'm learning that too." We didn't need to say everything. Some of it lived in the look he gave me, in the way he stepped fully into the house for the first time, like he finally believed he belonged there. We walked the fields again. He asked if the fence had always been that short. "It grew taller when you stood behind it," I said. He smiled. "Funny how memory works." "Not funny," I said. "True." That night, I gave him the box of letters. The ones he had buried. I had organized them, pressed them flat, slipped them into protective sleeves. "These are yours too," I said. He ran a hand over the first one. The ink had faded, but the grief inside it was still fresh. I don't know if I can read them all. You don't have to, I said. You already lived them. When he left this time, it was with a return ticket. 2 weeks, he said. Then I'll be back. Maybe I'll even fix that shed out back. I'll hold you to it. I'm counting on it. And when he hugged me this time, it wasn't desperate. It wasn't clinging. It was a promise made in muscle and memory. I love you, Cal, he said. I love you too, Dad. He smiled. You called me Dad. You earned it. And as he walked down the road, I didn't watch him disappear. I turned back to the porch, picked up the hammer, and began repairing the steps. One nail at a time. Building toward the return. The shed was half rotten when we started. Moss along the bottom, the roof caved in at one corner. But we rebuilt it, him and me, side by side, measuring and sawing, laughing when the boards didn't line up, swearing when the hammer missed. He was back. 2 weeks had turned into a month. Then 2. We never said the word stay out loud, but the roots had started to settle in. I thought I'd be afraid, he said once, wiping sweat from his brow. That I'd mess it up again. You might, I said. But now you don't have to do it alone. The shed stood taller by the end of October. A new roof. Fresh siding. We painted it the color of the sky just before dusk, blue with a hint of something softer underneath. He carved our initials into one of the corner beams. Just in case memory fades again. There were nights we still didn't talk. Nights where we sat on the porch and let the wind speak for us. But even that silence was different. Not heavy. Not sharp. It was the kind of quiet that only comes when something broken is slowly healing. One night, I asked him if he dreamed of the war anymore. Less, he said. And when I do, I don't wake up choking. I wake up sad. But that's better than terrified. Sadness means you survived, I said. He nodded. And sadness can be shared. Winter crept in like an old friend. The nights got longer. The fire burned hotter. We built routines, splitting wood, fixing old fence lines, watching old movies on a DVD player he found in the shed. On Christmas Eve, he handed me a gift. Small. Wrapped in a newspaper comic strip. Inside was a harmonica. I thought maybe you'd want one of your own. I smiled. Only if you'll play with me. We sat by the fire that night and played together, breath for breath, his notes sure, mine searching. A song without a name, made of memory and promise. In the spring, we planted a garden. I never knew how to grow anything, he said, kneeling in the dirt. But I think I'm ready to learn. The soil was stubborn. Rocky. But we worked it, pulled out what didn't belong, turned it until it was soft enough to hold something new. By June, green shoots had started to push through. He looked at them the way some people look at miracles. One afternoon, he brought out the letters again. This time, he read them aloud. One each evening, as the sun went down. Some made us cry. Others made us laugh. Some were little more than confessions written in fear. But each one was a step. A bridge. A small redemption folded in paper. You kept all my ghosts, he said one night. And you gave them names. I shook my head. No. I gave them graves. So you could start living again. And he did live. Not perfectly. Not loudly. But honestly. He became the kind of man who brought soup to sick neighbors. Who repaired broken bird feeders. Who smiled without flinching. And I became the kind of man who could forgive without forgetting. Years passed. Seasons turned. And one summer morning, I stood in front of a class of young kids at a local community center. I told them a story. About a boy who waited at a window. And a man who came back. Not to knock. Not to speak. Just to stand. And how, sometimes, that's the beginning. Not the end.